All right, well, thank you all for coming out this morning. I'm sure we'll have some more wander in, but knowing how I like to pack a lot in, we better get started on time. Charlie, would you open us in a word of prayer?
Father, we thank you so much for your love for us. Thank you that what you demonstrated on the cross when you died for us, and how you even now live and intercede for us in heaven. Father, we ask that you would teach us much in this class. We ask that you help us to use our minds to worship you as well as our hearts. In Christ's name we pray.
All right, so this is our third lesson in apologetics. The first one we did was an introduction, and we talked about what is apologetics, and it's not listed up here. It's like lesson 0. What is apologetics and why we do it, how we described it, defined it. And then the last lesson we took bullets 1 and 2 off this slide. Truth about reality is knowable, and the opposite of truth is false. And I talked about the fact that that's really required these days due to the fact that in society there are people who question whether truth is knowable and whether there really is an opposite of truth. And really the take-home message from that lesson was, obviously for us, I think most of us believe that these two things are true. And when we encounter someone who tries to convince us otherwise, you need to just listen to what they're saying, and they will always, in their denial of one of these two things, actually be implicitly using the fact that truth is noble or the opposite of truth is false. So that's the game, is to listen to where they smuggle it back in and then say, if you know that I can't know, then actually you know, and therefore you're denying what you're actually saying. So today we're going to be, hopefully it's going to feel like we're slowing down a little bit from what we have been, because we're going to take a couple, 2 or 3 weeks on bullet 3. Is it true that the theistic God exists? And really what we're going to be doing today is what's called natural theology, what we can know about God from nature alone. And we'll be doing that today and the next week and the next week at least. But we're going to be looking at proofs that we can offer that show that God exists. So we'll get into that. So the outline for the day, we're going to talk a little bit about theism. There were some questions last class or 2 classes ago about theism. And really when we start talking about proofs for God's existence, we really want to define what type of God are we trying to prove. Then we're going to talk about arguments in general, just to give you a primer on arguments and how they work in philosophy and logic. Then we'll talk about the Kalām Cosmological argument itself, the support for the premises of the Kalām Cosmological argument, attacks against the premises, and then what we can know from the argument itself. All right, so for theism, a theistic God is defined as a being who is super powerful, super intelligent, morally perfect, creator, supernatural, i.e., he can intervene in the world. And in our Christian faith, we often put omni in front of these because we'll push those to the extreme and into the infinite. But in philosophy, those are acceptable, but this is fine too. A person who is omnipotent is also super powerful. So those go hand in hand. So the theistic worldview versus other worldviews. So in theism, we have an infinite personal creator who exists beyond the world, who can intervene in it. That's theism. And as always, within a week, these notes and the slides will be posted if you'd like to get them. So if you feel like I'm going too fast to write everything, that's fine. I can give you the actual slides via the web. So theism, an infinite personal creator exists. That creator is beyond the world, but he can interact with his creation. Deism is just like theism, but we subtract his interaction with the world. We say in a deistic worldview, there's no miracles. Finite Godism, there's a God who exists, but he's not perfect or he's not powerful. And really the Muslim worldview kind of sometimes fits into this because according to them, Allah could lie to you if it achieved his end. But we typically will categorize them as being theistic. But when you really get down to the details, maybe they're closer to finite godism. Pantheism, a god is the universe. He is the all. You think of Star Wars where there's a force that you're trying to tap into. Panentheism, God is dual. So the universe is his body, and then he also has a mind separate from his body. And so the definition here, he has two poles, a potential pole beyond the world and an actual finite pole which is in the world. Polytheism, many limited gods exist in the same world. So those are basically the 7 types of worldviews that include God. And then here's the last one, atheism, no God at all exists anywhere. So we're going to be arguing for theism, obviously. So arguments in general. An argument is an attempt to persuade someone of something by giving reasons for accepting a particular conclusion as evident. So here we're using the philosophical definition of argument. By that I mean that it's not necessarily, although it can, it's not necessarily something that you wage angrily or with your emotion and you get upset. When we say I offered this guy an argument, it wasn't the ability to get angry at you. It was just a reasoned set of conclusions to help persuade them of a certain fact. And we're going to really be focusing in on deductive argumentation. And in deductive argumentation, we are going to reason from one or more, normally a couple general premises, to reach a logically certain conclusion. And we'll talk more about that in our next slide. A proper deductive argument is said to be sound. We'll say that's a sound argument. Now, what do we mean by a sound argument? Sound arguments have 2 conditions true of them. First, they have a valid structure. So when we, in logic, Socratic logic, there's several different structures of premises and conclusion that are valid. And we're not going to spend the time to delve into all those different structures, but I'll say all the arguments that we present here are valid. I'm not going to give you an invalid argument. So then the second qualification for a sound argument is that its premises are true. And when we have both a valid structure to our argument and the premises are true, then the conclusion is inescapable. It's inescapably true. You can't get away from the conclusion. So if someone offers you an argument that is valid, but you don't like the conclusion, then one of the premises you're going to have to find something wrong with them and take objection to it and show why one of those premises is actually false. So just some quick examples of a valid argument. This is a valid argument. All porcupines are cute. Edgar is a porcupine, therefore Edgar is cute. That is a valid structure, works. Now you may say, well, I don't think Edgar is cute, and then you may have to go look at one of the premises and show one of them to be false. This would be an invalid argument. All porcupines are cute. Edgar is cute. Therefore, Edgar is a porcupine. That's an invalid argument. That doesn't work. This is not guaranteed from the structure. True premises. Well, we can have an argument where everything is true. Horses are animals with 4 legs. Bessie has 4 legs. Therefore, Bessie is a cow. All of these are true statements. But the structure is totally bad. You wouldn't do anything with that structure. Then you can have false premises. All dogs are poodles. Chief is a dog, therefore Chief is a poodle. Obviously, if you know Chief out at Peaceful Way, he's not a poodle. So we would have to find one of these statements to be wrong, and it's that all dogs are poodles. So those are the two tests. Our arguments must be both valid, that talks about their structure, how the words and premises are arranged, and then they must have true premises. So let's look at a sound argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is kind of if you've ever been in a logic class, you'll see this 1,000 times. We'll go back to it over and over again. So this is called a syllogism. It's basically the type of argument that it is. This argument is valid. It appears to have true premises, therefore it seems to be sound. If for some reason we didn't like this conclusion, and we already checked, because structure is easy to check for. Either it's valid or it's invalid. No one argues about that. Then, if we don't like the conclusion, then we argue about the truth of the premises. And oftentimes in a debate, or even when you're discussing something with someone, you find that you actually argue backwards. So you'll give your proof, and then they'll object to one of your premises, and then you'll give an argument that tries to support one of those premises. And then they'll object to one of those premises, and you'll give another argument that supports those premises. So we'll be doing a little bit of that today. All right, so the argument proper, that's your primer. Hopefully all of y'all are good logicians now. That means you can do logic. So the argument, the Kalām Cosmological argument. First, a real quick primer on cosmological arguments. There's a whole family of cosmological arguments. They all argue from the existence of stuff to God's existence. We're going to take the Kalām version of it. This is a word from medieval Arabic that means to exist, to be. And this argument was done by some Muslim philosophers back in the day, just to prove that a God exists. The Muslim philosophy kind of rose in the medieval times and then fell, and then some Christian historians and philosophers found their works and read it, and there were some good treasure troves for them. William Lane Craig has kind of resurfaced this Kalām cosmological argument, and made it, brought it back into popularity. Started back in the 60s, and it's just grown today. So there are other cosmological arguments that argue from different perspectives. This is probably the simplest and the easiest, and I present it to you because I would like for you all to memorize it. It's not difficult, and then you'll always have it there with you. So it's a syllogism. It has two premises and a conclusion. The first premise is whatever begins to exist must have a cause. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Fairly simple argument. Now, for the arguments that we look at, I would like to give you a structure for them so you can see that they're true. So here's the Venn diagram of, here's the Venn diagram of it. So whenever we do Venn diagrams, we have different regions of area. So if this area is that which does not have a cause, then we can cordon off this circle to be that which does have a cause. So everything would fall in one of those two places, either because there's nowhere in between. Either you do or you do not have a cause for your existence. So this argument posits that everything that begins to exist is that which does have a cause. See that? That's what the first premise does. And then the second premise says the universe began to exist, so it puts it inside this circle. And then the conclusion says if the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause. Very simple. Everyone following that? So anything outside of that which begins to exist potentially does not have a cause. More about that later. So that's the argument. That's it. And so all we're doing now is proving that the universe has a cause of its existence. Support for the premises. So we're going to take the first premise first, whatever begins to exist. So if someone says, well, I don't believe this is true, here's some of the support. This premise aligns with our natural intuitions. Anything that comes into existence has to have a cause for its coming into existence. In fact, to suggest something can come from nothing is worse than magic. In magic, you have the hat, you have the magician, and the rabbit pops out. But to deny this, the rabbit just pops out of nowhere. So to deny that's worse than magic. It would be inexplicable why just anything and everything did not pop into existence uncaused from nothing if we were to deny the first principle. So whatever begins to exist has a cause. And it is constantly confirmed in our experience, which provides atheists who are scientific naturalists with the strongest of motivations to accept it. So we live our lives assuming everything has a cause. We don't look, we do our science based on the fact that we have a cause. Christopher, if you heard that in your house, what would you do? You would, that knocked itself, right? It just came into existence uncaused. No. If there is a knock, then there must be a knocker, and that's all that this is saying, that things don't happen for no reason. Like I said, science is based on causality. Some of our earliest scientists who laid the foundation for what we do today. Francis Bacon said, true knowledge is knowledge by causes. Laplace speaks of the evident principle that a thing cannot occur without a cause which produces it. David Hume, we talked about David Hume last week. David Hume was the one that said if it's not analytical or empirical, throw it to the flames, which was false. He also was a bit of an agnostic because he said we see X happen and then Y happen right after it. We assume that X caused Y, but we don't really know. Some people interpret him to mean that there aren't causes. And that wasn't his argument. His argument was we just maybe not for sure what the actual causes are. And so he writes in a reply, I never asserted so absurd a proposition that a thing could arise without a cause. So even David Hume the skeptic says, well, there are causes. I'm just saying we may not know what they are. Absolutely nothing can only produce absolutely nothing. That's what absolutely nothing can produce. This is Robert Jastrow. That's my guess at his name. The scientist's pursuit of the past ends in the moment of creation. This is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but theologians. They have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this guy, at least at the time of writing this is God and the astronomers. I think he started out as an atheist or agnostic and then became a theist. And he wasn't a committed Christian at this time. And I don't know. I don't know where he was since then. So he may be a Christian now, I don't know. But at least he recognizes that science is pushing scientists to accept a beginning and therefore a cause of the universe. The universe began to exist. This is our second premise. All scientific evidence and theory points to a beginning of the universe. Additionally, philosophy, what we can do without measuring things, also points to a beginning of the universe. So we're going to quickly go over some of the scientific points, and we're not going to spend time on all of them. But there is an acronym called SURGE that has been developed by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. And you'll see it's an acrostic. It's actually, but it's the second law of thermodynamics. The fact that the universe is expanding, the radiation afterglow that we see, the great galaxy seeds, Einstein's theory of relativity, and that gets a surge. We're going to look at these first two, and then if you want to know more about these, you can read I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, or you can see me afterwards. We can talk about it. All right, so the second law of thermodynamics basically says that that there's only a certain amount of usable energy in the universe, and we're constantly converting it from usable to unusable energy. And so if the universe never had a beginning, then there would be no gas left in the tank. So you can imagine every time we use energy, like even that knock right there is using energy. Some of that energy is being transformed into noise, we hear it. Some of it into heat. Some of it into deformation of the actual article. And what we do is in science we have a word for that, entropy. Entropy just means the randomness, the chaoticness of particles, and as particles become more evenly distributed, we don't have potential energies in one place that we can use. So there's more about entropy we can talk about too, but basically entropy is always increasing. That means the randomness of molecules in the universe is always increasing as time goes by, and as that increases we are using up our usable energy, and we're getting more and more unusable energy. So if the universe never had a beginning, then there was an infinite number of days prior to today, then why is there any gas left in the tank? We should have used up the gas a long, long time ago, is the argument. So in other words, if an infinite number of days have passed, there could not be a finite amount of energy, usable energy left. It would either have to be zero or infinite. So if we looked up and we said, oh yeah, there's an infinite amount of energy, it never runs out, then the claim that the universe is infinite in the past direction, at least it would not be as strong. But we know there's only a finite amount of usable energy left, and so we see the tank is on half empty. We can run that backwards and we can figure out when it was full, and it doesn't get more than full. So that's the second law of thermodynamics. The fact that the universe is expanding. In 2003, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin published a paper containing the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, BGV theorem. The Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem proves that any universe which has, on average, been expanding throughout its history cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary, and by that they mean a beginning. So this includes, if you're tracking in this stuff, even things like the multiverse, string theory, all of the theories that are even potentially viable for the universe fall prey to the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, and therefore has to have a beginning. This is not a result that scientists like. Here's one of the guys who wrote this paper. He has said, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." And of course, if you're an atheist and you don't want a God to exist, and you want the universe to be infinite in the past direction, the beginning of the universe is a problem, because something had to cause it to come into existence. Mr. Jastrow again, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak as he pulls himself over the final rock. He is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. So those are two scientific evidences for the universe's beginning. We'll shift to some philosophical arguments. These may seem a little less intuitive, but an infinite number of days has no end. That's how we define infinite, right? There's no end to it. But today is the end of history as it currently stands, right? Obviously, we think history is going to keep going, but today, right now, is currently in this moment. And so therefore there were not an infinite number of days before today, time had to have a beginning. That may not seem intuitive to you, but if you think about it, it is. And here's basically a counter way to state the same argument. A collection formed by successive addition cannot be actually infinite. So if you have 100 coins, and you just start every second, it doesn't matter how fast, adding a coin to that collection, you're never going to reach an infinite pile of coins. You're always going to be at some number. Even if you did this on through, potentially you never stopped, anytime you looked, you would have maybe a whole lot of coins, but it would never be an infinite number. There'd always be a finite number. So you can never form an infinite by just adding one to it. The temporal series of past event is a collection formed by successive addition. Each event is formed by adding another event to it. So if we look at our history, this event right now is another part of that history. Therefore, the temporal series of past events cannot be actually infinite. So 2 philosophical arguments against past infinity. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, hasn't God been around forever? But God is outside of time. He hasn't had an infinite number of time because he's outside of time. We could talk about that later, but God escapes this because he is a timeless, non-temporal being. Okay, so those were the scientific and philosophical supports for the premises. Now we're going to look at some of the arguments against the premises. Victor Stenger, you may have heard, maybe not, in one of his articles says the universe exploded out of nothingness. Out of nothingness. Well, we just need to quote Parmenides to him. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Right? That explains it all. Yeah, that's Latin. If you want a translation, I'll give you the modern day translation. Nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. That's the principle we were already talking about. So if he had just watched this movie a couple times, he would have known that was a ridiculous statement. So basically this says, out of nothing, nothing comes, is what ex nihilo nihil fit means. And basically, we have never experienced nothing. We've always only experienced something. Think about that. You've never experienced nothing. And so nothing is powerless to bring about something. Lawrence Krauss says, in fact, we now know, he's a physicist, given quantum gravity, that universes can spontaneously appear. In fact, one of the things about quantum mechanics is nothing, not only can nothing become something, nothing always becomes something, nothing is unstable. Nothing will always produce something in quantum mechanics, and if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, you can show that it's possible that space and time themselves can come into existence when nothing existed before. Okay, so let's talk about Lawrence Krauss's statement. Pardon? Saying something? Remember when, well maybe, who's, I know Perrine was in my class a long time ago. Maybe Jill, you are. But remember we were talking about this same general idea, and we said space is the bowl that holds all of matter and energy. You can think of it that way, right? So we have stuff, we have planets, asteroids, comets, whatever, and space is the bowl that holds that. And we often think about space being nothing, but actually space is what supports matter and energy to do all that it does. So when we exclude everything that we possibly can from space, and we get like a vacuum with no protons, no neutrons, no electrons, no nothing, there's still something there, and physicists call that the vacuum energy. So the closest that we can get to nothing is still something by our human standards. That is the nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about. He's not actually talking about the nothing that philosophers talk about. His nothing is actually something. And that something does produce stuff. My Star Trek fans, right? Anyone? No? No? Okay. So you know the dilithium crystals, they're there to regulate the flow of antimatter matter stream for the warp drive. And what happens when antimatter and matter connect? They mutually annihilate each other, right? So in fact, in the vacuum energy, you can have what's called a particle pair production, and this is what he's talking about. You can have out of the roiling energies of nothing that God has imbued space with, you could have a positron and electron both come out of that simultaneously because they're added energy, combined energy equals 0, because one's in the positive direction, one's in the negative direction. Those things come back together and collide. They go back down into the broiling energy of the vacuum energy. So that's what he's trying to say. He's saying in our vacuum energy, these particles always come up and they go right back in, they go up, go back in. Obviously, no relationship to what we're talking about, but that's what he's got his hope in for creating the universe. He thinks maybe we're just one big quantum thing where a bunch of matter came out. We don't know where the antimatter went. And that's what caused all the universe. So don't be fooled by this double talk. So Krauss's nothing is really something, namely the vacuum energy of space that we just talked about. By nothing, the philosopher means universal negation of being. Literally, no thing. Nothing there. And the vacuum energy is something. You know, you get into those silly stories about, you know, somebody saw something but nobody did it. You know, that's what he's using nobody as an actual antecedent of something else, or a pointer to something else. Space is something, as it is the bowl that holds all of matter and energy. Krauss's nothing still falls prey to the cosmological argument, because something has to account for the vacuum energy that we see in space. All right, so maybe you're asking, if ex nihilo nihil fit, then creatio ex nihilo? Some of y'all were thinking that, right? So basically this says, if nothing comes from nothing, then how did God create from nothing? That's what the question is. If nothing can come from nothing, well, before God created there was nothing, so how did he do that? And this is one of the pushbacks against this argument. So let's think about the statue, the thinker. The material cause, if you go back to Aristotle and his different causes, there's several. But the material cause of this statue is the bronze that's actually there. It's what the statue was made from. The efficient cause was Auguste Rodin, or Rodin, or however you pronounce French, I don't know. So there are multiple causes. We're just going to talk about the material and the efficient cause. The material cause was bronze. The efficient cause was Rodin. The universe. What was the material cause of the universe? Doesn't exist. There was no material cause from the universe. However, the efficient cause was still God. Now, this is imponderable to us in our finite minds, but for God, he can do this. So he can speak for something out of nothing, because he is all-powerful and he has infinite being. So this is what gets people caught up. Yes, there was no material cause of the universe, but there was an efficient cause. Now, for the atheist who says that the universe popped into being out of nothing, there is no material cause or efficient cause. So they're doubly absurd. You know, they're saying, well, yeah, it just popped from nothing else and there was nothing that even caused it. So that's the response to that objection. Bertrand Russell says, well, who caused God? If everything had a cause, then God must have a cause. And in Leibniz's time, he had a similar argument that talked about first causes, and there had to be a first cause that was the first mover. And so this is Bertrand Russell's response. So going back to our Venn diagram, we have things which have a cause, things which began to exist. The universe is certainly in this bubble of the things that began to exist. Where does God go in our Venn diagram? Outside. He never began to exist, so he escapes that first premise. He doesn't have a cause. And our argument is still valid and sound because he has always existed, therefore he does not have a cause. The argument says that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. God has no beginning, so he doesn't come under the argument. God is a self-sufficient being who cannot not exist. In philosophy, we call that necessary. And he must exist. We call that aseity. So those things go in hand. He cannot not exist, and not only that, he must exist. The bottom line for this is, where you can break it down to an atheist, something has to be eternal. If there's anything that exists now, there has to be something that has always existed to account for it. Even the lid of a pen has to have an account for its existence in either a material or a non-material cause. So either the universe has always existed, which by all science and philosophy is not going to work, or God does. Which one's more plausible? Obviously, God. All right, so that is the argument. What can we know from the argument? I said the last time I taught this class a couple years ago, several years ago, I've repented of some things. And last time I taught this class, we stopped right here. But you can actually know a lot about the theistic God from this argument alone. Not just that he's a cause, but we know some of his properties from this argument. So what the Kalām teaches us, so the universe and the creator, we're going to do some comparisons. The universe is bound by time. The creator is timeless. The universe is made of mass and energy. The creator of the universe is not made of mass and our energy, not photons and X-rays. The universe has extension. By that we just mean it takes up space. It's extended in space. The creator does not have extension, or he's non-corporeal. He doesn't have a body. The universe came into existence without a material cause. We already talked about that, right? The statue with bronze. God's extremely powerful. All right, any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay. Next week, we're going to stay with number 3. We're going to pick up the teleological argument, which argues from the design of the universe and gives an argument for it and some proofs of that. Nothing else? Looks like we're done a little bit early, which was predicted 2 minutes early, just right on time. Tim, would you close us in prayer?
Father, thank you that you have revealed yourself to us through creation, through your Son Jesus Christ. You've made yourself known to us, and therefore life does make sense. There is purpose or meaning. There's a direction that we can get from your source of truth, your word. We thank you for the opportunity to see how logical it is to believe that you exist. Pray that you continue to help us to reach out to those who are not looking at the obvious, and therefore in part they're blind by their own ignoring it. Help us to reach out to them and have conversation to the degree that they'll listen and talk. And we pray too that you'll help us to continue to live out the truth that we believe about you, that we would mirror you on earth best we can as we grow in knowledge and sanctification of Christ. So that, Father, that all men will come to believe that you sent Christ because we have love for one another. We have evident change that reflects the truth of what we spoke of today. So, Father, thank you for giving us the ability to learn here this morning. I pray that you will continue to bless Michael as he shares, he studies, and he helps us connect with these thoughts. So just pray for him, his time. Thank you again, and we pray you'll use us in Christ's name.
Thanks.